In one of the comic books, The Search, there was this scene that portrayed perfectly the relationship between Ozai and Azula. They were having a meal at the dining table, and Azula was saying that during her practice with brought defeat to the Fire Nation. This defeat inspired Ozai to request from Fire Lord Aslan for Iroh's birthright. This meant that he would then become the next Fire Lord after the death of Fire Lord Aslan. Of course, the Fire Lord was enraged by this, and in order to teach Ozai a lesson, he demanded that Zuko should no longer exist. By this act, Ozai would know and feel the pain of losing one's child. But truly, Ozai had no affection for Zuko because Zuko showed no signs of having that flair of brutality. Zuko was kind and soft hearted, and Ozai saw this as a sign of weakness. Therefore, without Zuko, Azula, whom he preferred, would be his rightful heir. Now, Azula overheard this conversation accidentally, and Ozai's actions once again affirmed and validated Azula's notion of what is and what should be. I think that this little interaction between Ozai and Fire Lord Aslan made Azula think that doing away with Zuko was a normal thing to do. She would be the next Fire Lord after her father, and Zuko would just as easily be removed. For didn't her father demand to do the same thing? Ozai no doubt entered the life of his father to become the next Fire Lord, and this was prime example for Azula to follow. Hence her obsession with Zuko's removal. Just like the lack of depth regarding the relationship between Ozai and Azula not being properly portrayed in the show, is also the relationship between Azula and her mother, Ursa. We know by now that Ozai favored Azula over Zuko, and Azula has this mindset of everything being a competition. The bond between these two, or lack thereof, is also a factor that affects Azula. Where Azula got praises as a kid from her father, she was almost always scolded by her mother. This is, however, not to infer that Ursa was a bad mother. The reason for this is because of the substantial difference between the philosophy of Ozai and that of Ursa. Where Ursa was kind and forgiving and attentive, Ozai was rash and unforgiving and brutal. These are opposites, and there is zero middle ground between the two parents. Azula did not understand her mother or why she acted differently from her father. In her eyes, her mother chose Zuko over her, and this must not be condoned. In one of the comics, The Search, Azula and Zuko were taking a walk in the royal gardens when Azula burnt a flower. Her mother was mad and told her to show respect for the royal garden. This is one example of Ursa not siding with Azula but with Zuko, who told on Azula. But nothing speaks more to what Azula felt at the supposed rejection from her mother than this scene.
Well, yes, I guess you're right. I don't have sob stories like all of you. I could sit here and complain how our mom liked Zuko more than me, but I don't really care. My own mother thought I was a monster.
It's in circumstances like this that one truly pities Azula, a broken child in need of love and approval. This is the first scene that showed Azula's vulnerability, and I think this goes to show that she has the ability to feel pain, not arising from bruised ego, but genuinely from the heart. And yet, her character cannot be oversimplified into a sub story, even though it definitely forms part of it. Perhaps it is in one of these situations that one might think of her as a victim, but then beyond the external influences, who truly is Azula? When it comes to Mei and Tai Li, Azula is fond of them, but not in the way that it should be. They were childhood friends and have many shared experiences, but in her own way, Azula does not treat them as equals. Besides, the fact of her being a princess and me and Tai Li being her subjects, she treats them as people who are just above being peasants. They can be with her, but they are absolutely, definitely not on the same level. Her manipulation of people extends even to her friends. She manipulated Tai Li into joining her so called elite team. when she wanted only to be a part of the circus team. The major problem that Azula struggles with is that she chooses to interact with people through fear. She makes sure that she instills fear in her followers and even in her friends in order to get what she wants. This is seen when Mei decided to help Zuko escape rather than to let him die. Her expression about loving Zuko more than she feared Azula almost single handedly tore apart her entire worldview. She thought that Mei and Tylee stuck with her in the first place because they were afraid of her. And to some extent, this may be true, considering the fact that they followed her every order almost without question, but this may also be because she was the daughter of the Fire Lord. Therefore, she never considered that they could ever turn their backs against her. Even though Azula made sure to rule with fear, in hindsight, she trusted Mei and Ty Lee. The reason is not far-fetched. They were with her from the beginning. They helped her conquer the city of Ba Sing Se. They cheered her on. When she sought to defeat the Avatar, they were right behind her. And so, when the conflict was between her and Zuko, Mei chose Zuko and Ty Lee sided with her. This scene is so powerful not only because of the shock of it and the blatant betrayal, but for the first time, Azula got a sharp reality check. To love did not mean to be weak, but her love actually was a stronger motivation than fear. Her entire worldview was built on fear, a courtesy of Ozai's handiwork. And because she saw how this method never failed her father, she thought that it was invincible. And when that reflection wasn't mirrored back, she completely lost it. Mai entirely gave Azula the support that she never knew she needed or had. They didn't just help her during fights, but they actually listened to her as friends would. They were there, and just by being there, they gave her strength. And this does not imply physical or intellectual support, because it goes without saying that on those counts, she was self sufficient. The relationship between Azula and Zuko is one of the best in showcasing sibling rivalry. Ever since Ozai discovered that Azula was a prodigy, Zuko became even less worthy than he was originally thought to be. Zuko was the firstborn and therefore by right was to become the next Fire Lord. Azula got all the praises from Ozai, while Zuko was belittled. Azula wanted to be the next Fire Lord, regardless of the fact that that was Zuko's destiny. This feeling from Azula was very much validated since her own father was a second son and still became Fire Lord, because as Azula thought, Iroh was weak. Zuko, on the other hand, just never understood why Azula behaved the way that she did. The tension between them was set from the very beginning and also affirmed when Azula thought that her mother chose Zuko over her. Their entire interaction throughout the show was always hinged on overt or covert antagonism. Azula wanted Zuko down, and Zuko was almost always playing defense. Even after he was banished, she wasn't satisfied. The entire show, so long as it is concerned with these two, was just enmity. The entire show, so long as it is concerned with these two, was just enmity. The one time that I thought Azula cared for Zuko was when she lied to Ozai that Zuko ended the Avatar. You would think that she did this to try and help Zuko, considering that their father had yet to meet him after his return from exile. But even this was too good to be true. She was only protecting herself, just in case the Avatar somehow survived. That way, Zuko will bear the shame and humiliation, and she, as always, will not be subjected to such scorn. Iroh and Azula aren't close. In fact, Iroh to Azula is a symbol of weakness. When Luten, Iroh's son, died and Iroh lost the motivation to continue the war against Ba Sing Se, Azula calls him weak, and she was just a child. The only time that the two were shown to have a moment was when Azula excitedly, just like Zuko, received a gift from Iroh. However, Azula was not happy as Azula was given a doll and Zuko a sword. From Iroh's perspective, I think that his fondness for Azula diminished when Azula showed signs of being her father's daughter and continuously waged her antagonistic schemes against Zuko. The timeline of their relationship is not shown in depth in the show, but it can simply be seen that Azula's entire worldview was drawn from Ozai, and this ran against Iroh's philosophy. Therefore, the two would definitely be at odds. Also coupled with the fact that Azula considers him a traitor of the Fire Nation. Regarding the argument that Iroh favored Zuko over Azula and left her at the mercy of their father, well, in Iroh's defense, Azula did not want him. Neither did she respect him like Zuko did. Sure, Zuko had his flaws and sometimes his temper got the best of him. He was glad to have Iroh in his life, and not only because he was banished from the Fire Nation and needed the company of family, but because he